William, Chair, can I say something? Yeah,
Oh, yes.
I can share a timer bot. There is a window called view. The timer bot will show after the speech have started. So yeah.
Phenomenal. Thank you very much.
Hi, could I check if I'm clearly audible?
Yep.
Right, thank you. POIs in the chat, please. I do not like people badgering me every second and every minute. Okay. Panels, I currently am from a Catholic high school, and purgatory is something that at the very least allows me to work for better and not be scared of opting into religion because I could go to hell anyway. 3 layers of setup here. Firstly, on what does the world look like and what will religions advocate, right? Because it is morally seen, because purgatory is morally seen as great, something like great thing, right? It understands the complexity of moral values and humans in humans, right? We think that religious usually will advocate for like active redemption, and we think that heavens will still exist. This looks like a Catholic where This looks like in Catholic where there is like purgatory and heaven, right, and hell, right? Religion actively advocates that you still need to do good and go to heaven because that is his final goal. But they will preach it in a way that that you have to do good if you don't want to get stuck in purgatory, right? Religion will preach what they believe in, i.e., if you do extremely bad, you still go to hell. I.e., we have the fear to say there is actually no hell, and it's just something that if you sin, you just stay in purgatory, right? But then secondly, on religion, right? Two things here. On what is the firstly on what is the point of religion? We think that religion guides individuals to act morally in their day-to-day lives, right? Because they need to behave in accordance with God's word, and because the morality of their actions has consequence for the long-term fate, right? E.g., whether will go to heaven or hell, which means that religion pressures otherwise selfish individuals into being more considerate. This isn't to say that atheists can't be moral, but rather on the margin, religion helps push people in the direction of moral behavior. But then secondly, what does religion actively need? Religion need constant buy-in to continue, right? They need people to actively support them in order to continue being a religion. This looks like giving them donations so religious organizations can still donate to the poor, etc. But then thirdly on setup here, on what does this debate has to be about? Although flawed, the best mechanism for religion to have widespread influence in society is through organized religion. So the bottom line of this debate has to be which interpretation of religion is the best for both worlds. But then a slight preemption here. We think that opposition is most likely going to run that people will probably be less incentivized to do good since there is such thing called purgatory. The problem with that here then is that religions actively promote that you shouldn't want to stay in purgatory, hence that you need to go to heaven, but there is still a hell, and you probably need to, but then still have a chance in this religion because there is the morally gray area too. But what is one main argument that I want to put forward here on spiritual growth? Before that, a point. 3, 2, 1. Spiritual on plus moving on to the argument on spiritual growth here. For 5 layers of things to under this argument. Firstly, why is it that we need to help those people who already why does this help those people who already subscribe to religion, right? The people who already subscribe to religion, some of them oftentimes have this guilt where I sin this little bit and I feel extremely helpless. Then we tell that we help these people who feel completely helpless and like, oh, I sin this little bit, or probably guilt trip into doing, I also have this internal guilt, right? Why so? We finally make them feel like more they have this motivation to work to do better now, because now I still have the ability to go to heaven even if I sin today, right? And this very mindset is what allows access and have motivation to for people to actually do good for themselves and to improve themselves spiritually, right? It actively pushes people to do good because they do not want to stay in purgatory, but now they do not have this fear of actually sentencing to hell, getting sentenced to hell directly or whatnot. They won't feel like this active tremendous guilt of staying into this religion then, right? But B, why is it that we allow for other people who haven't access to this religion to actually finally access to this religion. Minorities, people who are like part of the LGBTQIA community, has felt completely outcasted from religion because the moment they step into religion, the people will tell them that you are complete utter sinners and you go to hell. They feel completely violated and horrendous because there's something they cannot access to at all. They now feel like they finally have a place in religion. And then since now, they do not feel like they are fully and outrightly sinners and like go directly going to hell. They now have this access to religion too. This isn't only exclusive to LGBTQIA people who want access to religion. That includes people who feel internally hopeless, who are traumatized by religion too. Why is this very important here? Religion actively provides people with a sense of meaning and purpose here, right? It often comforts you and it's often comforting to know that you may in fact exist with a purpose, and religion tends to provide people with like a sense of fulfillment, knowing that knowing that they have a higher purpose than what they are in the current world, right? Even in lower moments, the belief that you will one day be saved by the promise of eternal salvation allows people to get past difficult instances of their life too, right? This self-growth is something only achievable under proposition's paradigm, where we allow for people to finally opt into religion and not feel like they're complete sinners who are utterly just directly going to hell with every single little thing that they do. People now have access to a community too, right? If LGBTQIA people all opt into this kind of thing, they still find others that are similar to them. They now have access to this community that have their backs no matter what and feel empowered from that. More people become good, and this actively allows the community to become better because other people have the incentive to help other people and be kinder towards other people. But D here, why is this unachievable completely under opposition's paradigm? People actively stray away from religion because people in the community often say you go to hell because of this minor mistake that you do. Under prop, we now have purgatory, which allows people to have this little hope that at least I am not going to hell immediately, at least I'm not hopeless at all, and people will probably start stopping to tell other people that you're going to go to hell because of this minor thing that you do. Therefore, all of this is only achievable under prop's paradigm. But E, what is a weighing metric in which we win today's debate here? Even if opposition wants to argue that this is against the principle of religion, which they still have to prove it to, right? How do we outweigh them? We tell you that the religion is about developing people too, right? It's like about sharing kindness to others, and therefore we win on the likelihood too, right? The likelihood of getting the principles and growing as a person through the moral values, that people will at least be more motivated to do even more good things, that these are the people who have done something bad in the past, right? Because everyone is not perfect, everyone have sinned a little. If we allow all of everyone to at least feel included into these different religions. These are the people that never feel included religions at all. Therefore, we still have to advocate for these things. For all these reasons, and for all that we are going, for all those reasons, so proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for those remarks. I welcome the Leader of the Opposition. Leader of Op, are you there?
Oh, hi. Okay. Wait, sorry. All right, wait, am I audible? Hello. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. Okay. Under our side of the house, we want to validate people and we want to make sure that people find comfort in religion instead of straying away further and further. So what opening government tell us today? They told us that it allows people to feel more accepted because of the gray areas. For example, gay people and minorities. We think this is an uncharitable case for us because our side also gets this too. In fact, I'm going to explain it more later on how we get this even more and how we validate people who fall into those morally gray areas. But second of all, we think that we likely still get gay people in heaven too, and we think there's a very huge contradiction coming from opening government because you say that purgatory purgatory is deemed as bad by most religions, but at the same breath you say that gay people can get into. So what's the difference with gay people getting into hell as compared to purgatory? If you also say on your side that being in purgatory is also deemed as very bad, right? We think that these people are also still shunned in society under your side of the house. We don't understand this very big contradiction in their case, right? So we think that, for some clarifications first, we think that religion is a belief to give people comfort, to give people a moral guidance in life, some sort of guidance and framework in order to live their life by. We think that the only people then in this debate are religious people because it only concerns them. And people turn to religion as a tool for mental comfort, as a comfort in their darkest moments, to ease any anxiety about the unknown, right? When we are just measly human beings with no control of external factors other than our own actions, we think that religion is something that they can turn to have confidence in whatever they're going to wait for. Right? I think it's also something that shapes society and the rules that we have built around our norms and things like this. And we think this framework is very important because it then allows us to, actually understand why we need religion in the first place and why this conception of heaven and hell is so important in this debate, right? I think that heaven and hell, it also needs to be clarified that it's there's something called like Judgment Day. As long as you have a net good, then you're going into heaven, right? I think that most religions, they're still very charitable. That people in religions, they get forgiven over for their sins all the time. For example, in Christianity, where Moses and Elijah, they committed sins, but they're shown to be redeemable, and this is shown in in a lot of stories in the Bible because the concept of religion is that it shows you that you can have second chances, that you can commit sins, but you can still be redeemable because you have a long life and you can still learn from your lessons, right? I think that Christianity is always preaching about second chances, and many religions also do this. I think this is very important because it's not a very simple case of whether you did one thing bad and you're just screwed the rest of your life. I think it's a more of a thing of how much good you did over your life versus how much bad, and how much you learn from that, right? So few arguments from our case. First, of how it provides comfort to believers. We think on our side, you've given a guarantee that you confirm go to heaven if you do good things without any ambiguity and without any anxiety if you're going into like purgatory or if you're going into hell at all, right? We think that there's no fear of anxiety about your afterlife, so you won't be pondering on the deathbed, wondering whether or not you will get to heaven, right? So we think we give believers this sort of comfort, right? Morally great things itself is also very ambiguous at times, where times are evolving and everything is changing, and there's new issues and new technologies every day, or new controversial topics like gay rights, things like this. More controversy that maybe goes against the religious scriptures, and pastors are always constantly saying different things because there's no fixed thing when things are constantly evolving, right? Because of this highly subjective framework, and because of so many things that are unknown, because you simply cannot ask God yourself, there's a high anxiety amongst believers because they don't know what is right and what is wrong and what is morally gray at a time where the scripture was just published like so many years ago, especially for believers who have been doing good their whole life, but it's something morally gray. For example, donating blood when they're part of the Jehovah's Witnesses. These are the people who are now screwed because they've been doing good their whole life, but they do this one morally gray act, right? Why is this so important? It's because these people have been doing good for society their whole life, which provides direct or indirect benefits to the community in work, for example, charity, being kind, and doing service work. I think that society owes them at least some comfort to know that what they've done has been worth it, and appreciate them. I think these are the people that needs to know that they're going into heaven at the end of the day, and at the deathbed we need to provide them this sort of reassurance and provide them this sort of comfort in order to alleviate their quality of life. Yes, I'll take that.
Do you think morally gray people go to heaven under your world?
Morally gray people, yes they do, because of because of our framework of how if it's the net good, then they will go into heaven, right? It's just a judgment of how much good they've done, right? But our second argument is how we get better adherence to moral standards. Opening government already refuted this by saying that religion says that the religion already preaches purgatory as something that is bad, but I think that is a very big contradiction in their case, right? Because they can't have that but also have the benefits of having a morally gray place at the end of the day, right? On our side, we think that you're more inclined to do good things, right? Because if these morally gray things, you don't know if it's good or bad, so it makes people follow their words the word and scripture even more closely, rather than just taking a shortcut and taking the fast way, right? We think that the end goal of heaven will be far more achievable on our side. Hence, you're more inclined to do good things because religious people take it very seriously, that there is, you know, a big world after your life. So you will take it very seriously. So you're going to better adhere the moral standards, and people will be more inclined to know that they have a place in heaven, right? So the third argument is how it allows people to do morally. It actually, on our side, we allow people to do morally great things. And this is a direct clash to opening government's argument on how you allow people to feel more accepted because of morally great areas. Because on our side, we tell you that the characterization of heaven is something that applies to real life, right? That the heaven is something that you go to because you've achieved a net good, instead of one sin that you've caused for that screwed you over the rest of your life. The comparative here is that on side proposition, what you're doing is you see purgatory as a bad thing, where in reality, religion is just a guidance, and it's not something that should be fixed, right? So because it's just a guidance, you allow people to do morally great things because it's just a net good, right? And you don't actually know if it's a good thing at the end of the day. So we think that we allow people to commit these morally great things, for example, donating blood to your loved ones when you're a Jehovah's Witnesses, because you've done many other things that were good in the past. You allow these people to do like one or two small acts of morally great things, and it gives them the confidence that they will at the end of the day go into heaven, right? So we think that because of all these reasons, we protect the people the most, and we protect the people who find comfort in religion, and we allow them to actually live a better life because they have the comfort of knowing that they will at the end of the day reach heaven because they've done more good things. Never been harder to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, give me a minute. Thank you. Okay, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. I want to start my speech in three. Also, verbal POIs. Start my speech in 3, 2. Principle of religion is to allow people to unlock the benefits of religion. It is to include people irregardless of their character. It is to include people irregardless of what they have done in their past life. I think under our side of the house, we unlock this benefit to advocating for less coercion within religion. We are able to unlock the benefit of inclusivity as a whole. One major clarification that I want to begin before dealing on with 4 different things and moving on to one argument on how this increases buy-in and inclusivity within religion. Major clarification here is on how my PM tells you that the religion pushes you to go further into heaven and encourages you to not stay in the religion. Yeah, sure, if you have done something extremely bad and you just cannot go to heaven because you probably have murdered someone, you'll probably stay into like purgatory, right? I think at least those people with sins have a place to go higher than hell or to go, right? I think it's important because this doesn't make people feel complete loss of hope within religion as a whole. 4 things I want to deal with OO. Firstly, OO tells us on how gay people are still going to be a bad scenario anyway. I think this is where they strain our case a lot, because under OO, gay people are going to be seen, going to be completely shunned away from religion, which are already seen as a complete sin, right? I think under our side, when we advocate for the ways that they can become a better people, even if they are gay people, that means that these people still belong into heaven, right? Second thing that I want to deal with OO is how OO says that second chances are under OO was still going to be accessible. I think it's already false, because the way religion operates under their side is an you have done something extremely wrong, then you are saying that you will go to hell, right? And third thing here is how this OO tells us how they don't know what people will be contradicted because they don't know what morally grey means, right? And they have more controversy. I think this isn't our burden to prove why to define why how in the ways people will be contradicted within the religion, right? Know that this is a PHP motion. I think we only need to prove why this with purgatory as a dominant religious norm, that is better for the vast majority of people. But let's deal with it regardless, right? I think for most organized religion, they have a lot of organized teachings and organized preachings. Like there will be structures to what is defined as morally great, or what structure or what teaching or what doings that will put you into heaven. Right? I think all of these things do still exist under our side house within the organized religion. The last thing I had to deal with was on the argument on how you alleviate the comfort of life. I think exactly why the existence of heaven still exists under our side house. If these individuals on the ground know that they have done so many things good too, then they probably won't be afraid to go to purgatory, right? Purgatory isn't all that scary as compared to hell, for example. If you do good, right, this means that you still go to heaven, and they've already have the comfort of knowing we don't understand the claims coming from of knowing that they go to heaven anyway. Right? The purgatory definition coming from PM that OO still hasn't yet to respond is that under purgatory is that it advocates that people want to actively improve, that everyone isn't perfect, right? This means that even if you're super perfect and you still have done extremely good, that you can already be in heaven, that it still pushes people to continuously do good even more, right? But preemption, before I move on into my main argument, is how more people come out here to tell you on how you use radical Christians, right? I think radical Christians who do not agree with purgatory, right? It's a trade-off under this. I think we allow for more people to come into religion too. Things like people who are LGBTQ and people who within the working class, right? Sure, there may be a demographic of radical religious people, but I think these are already the very minority of them, right? But even then, right, radical religious people extremely love religion, then it is just less likely that these people will opt out into religion anyway, right? One main extension there to argue on how this increases buy-in and exclusivity within religion. Let's first understand what religion looks like under status quo. I think A is that churches have a lot of coercion, but B is that the vast majority of people have a lot of responsibility to fulfill, i.e. they have work or they work a 9-to-5 job, which is extremely tiring, or they have a family to take care of. Why is this argument on working class so big? Because the vast majority of people have a family to take care of, and they are within the working class. But C is that the existing norm within status quo is just too extreme, right? Go to hell for doing good, or go to for doing bad, or go to heaven for doing good, right? But this also means that there's a huge barrier to who enters heaven and who enters hell, right? Churches tell you that you need to donate to the church in order for you to go to heaven, or that you need to have to go to the church on every single Sunday to repay your sins, or if you're gay, then you're just literally going to hell, right? Or even a different religion like Muslim, for example, they always have to go into a mosque, right? All of these just make the individual, a lot of the average individual in religion see as morally great because they don't have the time to fulfill all these criteria. That's why a lot of people don't opt into religion and opt into atheism, right? But then lastly is how the vast majority of people are stuck in the instance of being in a state of atheism, or being forced to follow and do the deeds of religion as a whole, which is just tiring, right? Why do we solve this under the comparative? Three things. A is that religion just have less coercion under the upfront, right? Because they don't force people to donate to or go to their churches or institutions, right? Then the working and middle class individuals can have more freedom to opt into these religion, right? But then second is how minorities like people within the LGBTQ movement can now opt into this religion too, right? Instead of the religion alienating these individuals, or they don't want to join because they are seen as quote unquote sinful, they are seen as morally great people that can actively advocate for good, they can still go to heaven, right? But see, all of this is true because when purgatory is a dominant norm, then instead of advocating for what is sinful and what is good, you advocate for the purity of individuals. You try to understand that people exist within different struggles or regions, that you don't exclude certain people for who they are. But purgatory in of itself accepts that no one is perfect and that everyone can improve as a whole, right? Before I move into the impacts, preempting two things coming from opposition. A is that because they'll probably argue that hell still probably exists in religion, so they'll still be seen as sinful. I think when purgatory is the main dominant religion, it shifts the focus from doing what is sinful. But the narrative of religion also changes when purgatory is a dominant norm, right? It doesn't focus on what is sinful, but rather it focuses on the way in which you can improve and change yourself. Two, they will probably argue that people now don't do good, right? I think people whose religion is already an important part of their life will still donate irregardless. But heaven still exists, and purgatory actively advocates for the way to improve and go to heaven. Therefore, they'll still do good. Last is the impacts. I think four things here. A, at the end of the debate, both sides will agree that the principles of religion is one that is very important and good. This inherently means when more people opt into religion, this just means that the self-actualization argument from religion, when you read the Bible and discover more moral teachings of a religion, is much more accessible under our side house. B, it's also when we help the most vulnerable group of people, who are the people within LGBTQ LGBTQ movements, right? These are the people who are alienated and oppressed under status quo that we live in. Under OG exclusively, that we allow them for this sense of belonging. We give them this community that they never had. We accept them irregardless. Thirdly, we accept the largest group of people to unlock this benefit. On scale, this is all on scale we win. But this is also important because religion now become better and communities becomes better. Lastly, here's how we also unlock the benefit of religions being held more accountable by accepting people irregardless of who they are and what they've done. This also validates people. If the only way to forgive people, to unlock moral values and have more people feel included within religion, then is to advocating purgatory as a dominant norm, we don't give a damn.
Thank you, DLO, for that speech. Thank you, DPM, for that speech. I welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right, thanks. When that working class person is in a life of ambiguity and uncertainty, I think the assurance of heaven is more important for him than the possibility of purgatory. I want to get a few things out of the way here. First, I don't think government side can necessarily say that purgatory is all too rosy a place. For instance, if they truly want to go with Catholicism as their framing here, then in this case, purgatory is literally the hottest fires imaginable in which a person burns for literally centuries or years at a time. Meaning that this is a place not that people necessarily want to go to as a waiting room outside the clinic to heaven, but instead a place of immense suffering that people are likely to avoid anyway. Secondly, in terms of things like being gay or being a minority, if a religion is truly highly discriminatory, we think it will probably be things like mortal sins, which your side probably is not inclined to forgive anyway. But thirdly, what is the threshold for heaven? Because their side seems to make it out to be like if you only go to heaven if you, for instance, are as pure to be canonized as a saint. This is likely to be untrue for a few reasons. Firstly, in reality, we clearly see that, for instance, mainstream Protestantism, many of these church leaders are fine to say that, for instance, yes, many of us are sinners. We do sin in our daily lives. But if we, for instance, let's say, find Jesus Christ or seek redemption through doing good things, we are likely to go into heaven anyway. Secondly, and more realistically, on a more meta level, in order to get buy-in from the various groups, as well as from just a greater variety of human beings, like regular human beings, I think they have to lower this threshold to get the same amount of buy-in. If their side wants to lower thresholds to get buy-in, I think our side is likely to be fairly generous as well. I'll take your point.
Do you think hell is worse than purgatory?
Yes, hell is worse than purgatory because it's permanent. Yeah, we find no issue with that. The thing is, yeah, sure, we think the permanence of hell is worse than purgatory. Yeah, no issue with that. Okay, now I'm going to move on to some responses into OG's case. Firstly, their arguments center around the idea that the idea of purgatory will actually motivate sinners, and that people are more and encourage some kind of buy-in from outside from various groups. Firstly, I'm going to talk about just your average Joe and focus on discriminated and marginalized groups later. First, in terms of your average Joe, we think that that means that person is far less inclined to buy into a religion with a system of purgatory. But next, I'm going to focus on what seems to be the main actor that their side is going for here, which are minority groups, like, for instance, gay people or minorities. I think that from the outset, if the final possible outcome for these people under these religions are purgatory, I think that's incredibly problematic here. Because that means that regardless of what that marginalized person has done in life, that person will never be enough in the eyes of that religion or those religious leaders in order to go to heaven. This is crucially different. Whereas in our case, we accept, for instance, the model that exists under, let's say, modern mainstream progressive Protestantism, where in spite of, let's say, being gay or being a minority, you're more than able to go to heaven if you, for instance, do things like devote your life to Christ or do good things in alignment with the church, consult your religious leaders, so on and so forth. We think then that their side ultimately turns these people away more and is even more discriminatory, because it implies that no matter what they do, these people are sinners from the outset. A parallel here is how the Falun Gong treat, for instance, people of mixed race, where these individuals are seen as impure right from the outset and therefore undeserving of heaven or spiritual salvation. As a result of this, we think their side will never truly respect these individuals and as such turn away their most important actor. Lastly, I'm going to focus on the element of coercion. Their side mentions the idea of how hell can be used as a coercive tool to get things such as money out of individuals when it comes to things like, let's say, like the church demanding donations. We think this is worse on their side. This is because the idea of the threshold of whether or not you're in purgatory is far more ambiguous as to whether or not you're in heaven or hell. On our side, if you simply are a good person and follow the basic teachings of, let's say, the Bible, you're going to go to heaven. Most people know that. It's pretty difficult to get conned on that. Whereas in the case of purgatory, you're going to have systems like the Catholic Church's system of indulgences back in the day, where individuals were unsure as to whether or not they would spend years or centuries in purgatory and as such be coerced by religious leaders, no thank you, in order to pay things like endless tithes, in order to actually coerce these people more. We think that ambiguity is actually a lack of information, especially an information asymmetry between potentially coercive religious leaders and followers. This actually creates more room and more susceptibility for abuse on the side of government bench. Now, I'm going to talk about why our side actually allows for better buy-in on the comparative and tell you why Angun's points are incredibly match-winning. Firstly, we've established that there's a lack of a clear threshold, clearly in LO, and that hasn't been necessarily disputed by government bench. This is incredibly important because to actually have some degree of comfort and some degree of safety in the eyes of these followers, they need a sense of certainty, a sense of reassurance, especially amidst the chaos of their lives. For instance, with, let's say, those from economically marginalized backgrounds. No, thank you. Yeah. So as a result of this, we think on our side, these people are given more emotional comfort by the assurance that there is a heaven, rather than that working class person literally wondering every single day whether or not a crime of necessity would lead them to purgatory, whether or not they actually ended up redeeming themselves for it, or at least trying to find salvation or forgiveness for it. Secondly, on our side, a direct way of heaven allows people to buy in, especially those from more marginalized backgrounds, because they understand that in spite of whatever's happened in the past, they are able to buy into this religion because there's this assurance that just like Moses, who was a murderer, just like Elijah, who turned away from God, you can still find heaven in the end. And lastly, and most importantly, we think it's incredibly important that on our side, we have this idea of certainty insofar as we're actually able to prove that you have a guaranteed outcome, whether or not of you entering this religion. We think that in the end, this brings this community closer together, because on their side, they simply reject you based on the outset. Whereas on our side, we are sure that you have a chance, regardless of who you are, where you come from, what you did, that is a gateway to heaven. Whereas on their side, you are still a failure doomed towards purgatory. That is the world on government bench.
Thank the DLO for those remarks, and thank the top half for what was a riveting debate. We now move on to the bottom half of the debate. I welcome the member of the government. Here.
So, can I be heard?
Yep.
Sweet. POIs verbally, please. All right. Here. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. As this is not a regret debate, it is about the standings of what is happening here and now. And in the 21st century, it is actually really hard to be a good person. The shampoo that I use to clean my body is used with animal testing, which has horrific crimes associated with it. The products that I buy come from places all over the world that are made in terrible sweatshops where people work and like literally die. And the games that I go to on the weekend, or when I've gone and watched football overseas, something that I really enjoy doing, the stadiums are often built with things like slave labor. It is really, really hard to be a stereotypically Christian good person. And the characterization that Top Half has of a non-purgatory world's requirements to get into heaven heaven are objectively incorrect, are incorrect by the Bible, it is incredibly difficult to get into heaven. And I think that's what is going to win CG the debate, because that is why you do need purgatory. Because in this day and age, it is so hard to be a good person. Morality is more complicated than it has ever been. People are more connected than they have ever been, which makes morality that complicated, which is why you need that level of certainty. But first, let's identify what the problem of Top Half is. Firstly, with OG, they actually just never explain the premise of why we need this change, which is what we give you in this setup here. But secondly, and more importantly, they draw a very narrow bow in their case, where we think that the impact extends far more broadly, well beyond religious people. Because we think if we can prove to you that we give benefit to non-religious people by making the world a more accepting and better place generally, we have a far greater impact, and you should obviously just vote CG for that. But I think OO have a far bigger issue because they just don't understand the requirements to get into heaven. But secondly, and more importantly, I asked in my POI, do you think hell is worse than purgatory? Because, well, all the people that will go to purgatory under our side go to hell under their side, and they suffer a lot more. So that's just a huge instant dub for our side. You should obviously care about that quite a lot. And lastly, I would just note that they go on a lot about certainty and how important it is and you need certainty in your life. You have a certainty of 3 things now as opposed to 2. They never explain the actual, whether that's the tipping point between having certain and not having certainty. And obviously we think that the vast majority of people don't necessarily, a large amount of people do fall into that morally gray area, and those people will get far more certainty because they have a religious ending that identifies with them personally, far greater than necessarily a moral binary of heaven and hell, particularly in the 21st century. Great. So we think both of those teams are out of the debate. How do we win? But before I do that, some quick points of setup. The first thing is, what does the non-purgatory world look like, i.e. opposition's world, because OO just gets this wrong. The first thing is to note criteria as to how you get into heaven in a non-purgatory world. You need to be baptized, you need to die honorably in the image of God, you need to have a life of salvation, you need to accept Jesus Christ as your singular Lord and Savior, and you need to constantly over the course of your life. These are Catholic teachings. They're very direct. Go read the Bible if you want to right now. That is the requirement to get into heaven. That's pretty strict. That's a lot of things. If you do none of those things at a certain point in time, your ticket to heaven is very much in question. That's a huge pressure for a lot of people. That's a much higher burden than side opposition would like you believe. But secondly, I would note here, if you don't do any of those things, you just immediately go to hell. And that is quite problematic because as opposition and OG have described, it's a very bad place, lots of flames. If you think purgatory has flames, obviously hell has more flames. So that's obviously way worse. But secondly, what is purgatory under our side and how does it work? A few important characterizations and premises that were not made by OG. A few things here. Firstly, it's obviously what the Infoslide says about it being a moral gray area. And I would just note here that obviously all people who would go to purgatory will go to hell under their side. But secondly, I would note here, you must go into heaven post-purgatory. So all people who go into purgatory are ending up going to heaven. So those you can't go to hell from purgatory. So that just means the people who are in purgatory aren't just living in a hell of turmoil about, oh my goodness, am I going to go to heaven or hell? They know they've got a ticket at the end. It's kind of just a time where it can be peaceful without any questions of the mortal world and just think about philosophical questions, which you're very unlikely to do in the rest of your life. Thirdly, I would note you must just be a moral person to get into this anyway. You must die in God's grace, but you must just need some form inside of you purified. So have a certain mistake that you've committed over the course of your life. What this just means is you still just have a lot of incentives to get into purgatory. It's not just if you're an evil person who's done one good thing in your life, you can still get into purgatory. No, other way around. You still have to be a very good person and follow a majority of religious teachings, but have certain moral questions that you need to figure out, which is what purgatory is purposed for. Great, cool. All right, our extension now. Why does this encourage moral questioning, and why does this make the world a better place? How does this happen? The first thing we note here, it encourages a massive rethinking of moral binaries. This is incredibly useful because moral binaries are totally fake. Things are complicated. There's no such thing as good and evil, particularly in a world where things are incredibly complicated. See my setup. But the second thing that I would note here is that religious leaders are incredibly powerful metric of perpetuating things like morality, perpetuating things like societal norms. The Pope is objectively one of the most powerful people on the planet. What this means is when we have religious teachings that are now more centered around away from moral binaries, this just means that you are now not going to have teachings that are directly about that. This means we'll have teachings that are far more focused on there being moral complications, on things like purgatory, which is something that a lot of people are going to be interested in, particularly in the current day and age where something like that is so potent. But the third thing I would note here is this shifts general religious teachings to things about recognizing acts of certain religious leaders that may have been not necessarily perfect their entire life, or certain historical figures in the Bible who may have been which people obviously identify with because they are flawed characters, humans are flawed beings, are going to certainly necessarily be taught in a way that encourages and supports things like moral complications, things like pushing away from moral binaries. So why is this important? 3 reasons. The first of which is just people don't question morality generally. It's very inconvenient to do so. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have. People have no motivation to do that. The meaning of life is not a question that most people ask most of the time. Life's too busy. The second thing I would note here is morality is complicated and growingly so. The third thing I would note here is that religious teachings are like a pressure cooker the majority of the time.
Point of
It's a
information.
high stakes game. Heaven, hell, nothing in between. Very high stakes, very high pressure, huge amounts of eternal life versus eternal damnation. Very, very, very hard for most people to comprehend in the most useful way. But before I impact these claims and knock any other team out of the debate by taking the highest burden, does closing want to tell me their extension? Opening, do you have a point?
Yeah. Given you agree that the world is highly complex, would it then not help people with complex moralities or complex backgrounds to have the assurance that they can go to heaven rather than risk the perception of failure in purgatory?
Like, mate, you have the assurance of 3 things as opposed to 2. Like, listen to my speech. I don't actually know what the difference between those 2 things are, particularly if the vast majority of people are going to very clearly be one of those 3 things. But secondly, I would flip this and say that because most people are morally complex, when you look at the moral binaries of heaven and hell under your side, you freak the fuck out because you know, wait, shit, I can't go into heaven because I'm not morally perfect, but I'm certainly not morally evil, so I'm not going to go into hell. Who the fuck am I? Am I just like not a religious person? Am I not made in God's image? Obviously, that's way less assurance than you get under our side. You get way more assurance when you can identify with one of the religious teachings. But let's impact our claims and impact them over every other team. The first thing I would note here is this reduces any crime that's done in the name of religion. This reduces huge amounts of religious extremism. This is the largest impact in the debate because this impacts non-religious people too, taking a higher burden than opening half. Why does this happen? This happens because hate crimes on the basis of things like religion are just likely to dramatically decrease. People who are like, oh, you're a religious freak because you only think there is good and bad and nothing in between. I don't identify with that. Is obviously going to dramatically decrease. Obviously, things like the Crusades, where people try and like eliminate sin from the planet, eliminating all evil because you have to be good, those things are likely to dramatically decrease because religion is seen as much more complicated. Discussions of morality are far more likely and to happen on a far larger scale. That is the largest impact in the debate. Obviously, you should care about that the most. Vote CG.
Thank you, Member of Government. Member of Opposition.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Thanks. At the very top of my speech, I just want to box out OG. First of all, PM said that like if people commit a sin or feel hopeless, they're going to be placed in hell. Note that every single religion has a way to reclaim yourself. Of course, you can repent your sins. You can give back to your community in order to reclaim yourself and go to heaven. By every religious standard, there's never a black and white where every morally wrong act will place you in hell. There will always be a way to save yourself by working hard to give back and be a morally righteous person. Therefore, a lot of OG's case about like why people lose hope and why purgatory gives people that feel like that hope for them. This is out because if they really care so much about going to heaven, they will do everything in their power to do good and save their fate. Second of all, I just want to clarify what Gov has to defend is the concept of purgatory being the dominant religious norm. What is the implication of this and how does this change the debate? First of all, when it's the dominant religious norm, it's not a side story to heaven and hell. It supersedes heaven and hell and is preached as something that is dominant in a lot of religions. This means that OG can't argue that people on their side are still incredibly encouraged to go to heaven because now purgatory is at the forefront of the religion. The problem with the opening half is they don't acknowledge that purgatory exists on both sides of the house. If OG is worried about vulnerable individuals, they will end up in the right place. Few responses to CG then. They open their case by like saying like moral actions are gray because we live in the 21st century. Like, no, as I said before, like number one, it's not as deep as once you commit one bad action, you go to hell. There's always a way to redeem yourself and go to heaven. But second, if there's no such thing as good or evil according to CG's definition of morality, then on their side, that just means nobody goes to heaven because everybody is living in that morally gray area. If, yeah, you're the shampoo you wash your hair with is coming from animal testing, and that's a morally gray action, then obviously on their side, nobody will end up in heaven because that's morally gray and you have no idea, and so you'll end up in purgatory. Unless you do have an obvious morally excellent act, like solve poverty, then you go to heaven. This is just a very obvious problem with CG because then nobody will subscribe to religion and nobody can get into heaven and have the afterlife fate or the outcome that they want. First extension on why having purgatory as a dominant religious norm discourages people from doing good. The premise is just, in a religious system where heaven and hell are the only outcomes, individuals are motivated by clear dichotomy. They strive for moral excellence to achieve the heaven, or they risk eternal punishment in hell. Having purgatory as the dominant norm creates a middle ground that undermines the urgency to act morally, allowing individuals to justify morally dubious behavior. Having a strict moral code on our side, where heaven and hell are dominant in the religion, makes people much more likely to do morally correct actions. I want to analyze this extension through a spectrum of stakeholders to have the broadest impact. First of all, the individuals who have committed sins or morally bad actions that would have been deemed bad. On our side, these individuals do face consequences for their actions in the real world, but they either fully repent and reform their actions to qualify for heaven or remain condemned to hell. This binary system creates a very, very strong incentive to engage in significant acts of giving back, such as repairing the harm done or helping others in your community, or just adhering to the strict moral codes that your religious leader tells you to adhere by. This means for most religious people, no matter if they commit sins or not, they still want to go to heaven on our side because that's the best possible outcome. Which means on our side, when there's no moral gray ground, they do everything they can to fix what they've damaged. But on the comparative, knowing that they can avoid hell by doing the bare minimum to qualify for purgatory, they are less likely to make the fully right decisions to change what they've done in the past. Instead of striving for rehabilitation or making the best of the situation or trying to give back fully to their community, they find it far more easier to just fulfill the minimum requirements of purgatory. Why is this true? It's true because human beings ultimately want to find the easy way out, right? We have a lot of things on our hands. Normal people, we have a lot of priorities to tend to, especially like CG says, we live in the 21st century. So there's a lot more things to care about than actually going to afterlife. This means that a lot of people, for them, fulfilling the minimum requirements for purgatory is good enough because there's minimal suffering. It's not as great as heaven, but it's not as bad as hell. This creates a society where moral rehabilitation is half-hearted and societal harm is caused by morally bad actions that still persists. But second of all, the individuals who are currently morally gray, on our side, without a middle ground, morally gray individuals have to actively decide whether to align themselves with virtuous behavior or risk eternal punishment. Notice that a lot of people really don't think long term because we suffer from short-termism as human beings, which means a lot of people, including religious people that care about the afterlife, aren't necessarily thinking about their death or what's going to happen to them after they die. Because first of all, nobody really actually knows what happens, but second of all, they don't think that far into the future. What does this mean for average people then? It means a lot of the time when purgatory is extremely dominant as a religious norm, a lot of people feel like that is much easier to do instead of going out of their way to help and do morally excellent things when they already have so much on their hands. Debating on CG's definition, these people automatically end up in purgatory because everybody is morally gray. On the comparative though, these individuals know that they can justify morally dubious actions as not bad enough for hell, and for a lot of individuals who are neutral, that is much, much better. These individuals, for instance, they may engage in semi-selfish or harmful behavior while believing that minor repentance will still ensure they land in purgatory rather than hell, and for them, it's much better. The presence of a safe middle fosters complacency. There's no strong incentive to aim for heaven anymore when purgatory is perceived as sufficient and attainable fallback for people that don't really want to try hard enough to fulfill what their God wants to go to heaven. But third, for people who are extremely fixated on going to heaven, these individuals on our side are highly motivated to go above and beyond in their moral actions. Note that this doesn't just please God, right? This also pleases society because ultimately the impacts that they have committing morally righteous actions impacts the society that they live in. But on their side, it reduces the urgency and necessity for striving for heaven. Even if they still are striving for heaven, they know that even if they screw up or even if they don't try hard enough, there's still a safe middle that they can fall back to, which reduces the urgency and necessity for actually doing these morally good actions. We think that this harms society rather than helps it. We are so proud to CO.
Thank you, Member of Op, Government Whip.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Cool. Just give me a second to get organized. Sorry. In a debate about heaven and hell, the most damning thing in this debate is the level of straw manning going on. Because opening half comes up and tells you that, like the opening half deadlock is basically just like, is the anxiety of like, going into hell greater than like the like good feeling is you get of like the confirmation of like going to heaven on from OOO, and they never really resolve which of these is actually like more beneficial for you as a person, which of these actually makes you act like a more moral person. We're going to take the highest burden in this debate and tell you that this kind of like moral consciousness actually matter, because all you need to know in this debate is that for CG to win, we just need to prove that like having the idea of purgatory just makes you more likely to critically evaluate your life as a person, to think about how you can maximize your chances of going to heaven, to think about how you can like maximize your chances of like living in God's good graces and things like that, rather than like just giving up entirely and just like taking the L going to purgatory, because it's just like counterintuitive to what it means to be a good like Christian. So CO comes up in this debate and tells you a bunch of things. Firstly, to tell you that like when purgatory as a concept exists as a dominant norm, then this devalues the idea of heaven, and this devalues the idea of like trying to do your best to go to heaven in the first place. And the question we'd like to ask CO is, do you think heaven is a nicer place to be than purgatory? Because if the answer is yes, then obviously people still have a maximal incentive to maximize their chances to go to heaven in the first place, because obviously we don't really know what purgatory is like. It could be really, really bad, but not as bad as hell. It might just be like somewhere where you just sit and think for a while about like whether like you feel like not jealous or not, things like that, right? But we'd argue that no matter what you think purgatory is like, it's probably not as good place to be as heaven, in which case people still have an incentive to do their best to get into heaven, which knocks out that from CO. Secondly, they tell you that no one goes to heaven now because no one is moral, which is like a straw man of our argument. Our extension tells you that in a world where it is increasingly difficult to be moral, the concept of purgatory now allows a lot more people to access the comfort of religion. Allows a lot more people to access the fact access heaven in the first place, because when you know that because God knows that like you've been as moral as you could have possibly been, right? In a world where you die in God's good graces, but maybe you still like don't know if you're like a morally good person or not. Maybe you're jealous of the guy that your ex-wife cheated on you with, and maybe you need like some time to figure that out. We posit that like you still need to be a good person to get into purgatory in the first place, but when you have doubts about yourself, when you have things like jealousy, God doesn't want you to pollute heaven with that jealousy. So purgatory is a place for you as a good person to sit and figure that out before you are able to move on with your afterlife and enter heaven in the first place. So maybe you have moral doubts, but you're still a good person. This doesn't mean that like you can be like a 50-50 good/bad person and get into heaven eventually. This is just untrue, and it's like a straw man claim from CEO that you should. Third claim the CEO makes is that you can justify morally bad actions because you're like, if I'm just like 50-50, like, or if I'm like 51-49 net good at the point of time in which I die, then I'll be able to go into purgatory and then eventually into heaven. But like noting again, extension tells you like this is not how the ability to enter into heaven through purgatory works. You still need to be a good person. You need to die in God's grace. You need to like act in accordance with God's morals and principles. So maybe you're not like completely figured out whether or not who you are yet, but you have acted as a good person. You have tried to live by God's tenets. That is what makes you a good Christian. That's what makes you a good fit for heaven in the first place. So if you don't do any of these things, then you are unable to enter the purgatory in the first place. So this doesn't mean you can justify morally bad actions. Our extension just knocks out of the park. Last thing that CO tells you is that people don't think about the future, and this encourages people. And people don't think about the future, which stops them from like maximizing their chance to enter heaven. The opposite is probably true, because when you are like when you are forced to think about whether or not you're going to go into purgatory or heaven directly, obviously, we already told you that like heaven is a much better place to be than purgatory is, and as a result of that, you probably want to maximize your chances of going to heaven directly, and therefore you have like the comfort to kind of like sit there and figure out like how you can effectively maximize your chances of being a good person and going to heaven, rather than just giving up at the point where you commit like one small minor infraction of God's like tenets or whatever, and you think that you're doomed to go to hell. It's probably a bad world to be in if you're a religious person. This might make you lose faith and you lose all the benefits of religion that people in this debate want to talk about. I'll take that POI.
How do you get religious buy-in if the threshold to going to heaven is very high?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to move on to OO. I'm assuming that was the OO team that asked that. I think OO was out of this debate because we asked them two really damning questions that like avoided both of them. We firstly asked them, do morally great people go to heaven? If you believe the answer is no, then so many people are benefited by the concept of purgatory. Because if you think that people who would otherwise go to, if people who maybe should go to heaven are consigned to go to hell because of the fact that they haven't been like completely perfect their entire life, then this means that a lot more people are comfortable with the idea of opting into religion in the first place, because you know you're not going to like be doomed to go to hell from the moment you opt into religion. This means a lot more people have access to comfort religion without thinking they're doomed to get from the get-go, which increases the opt-in into religion and the benefits of religion in the first place. Second question we asked them, is hell worse than purgatory? And if the answer is yes, then OO is kind of factual. It's just worse because obviously, if you think that hell is the worst place in purgatory, then the people who would go to heaven in a world where purgatory exists otherwise go to hell, and they are just like screwed over by this. Whereas the kind of factual would be like they can go into purgatory, suffer for a little bit, and get through their like shit, and then go into heaven afterwards. So if hell is the worst place in purgatory, then obviously you have a maximal incentive to act like morally and in God's grace to kind of like make the world a better place, etc., which is how we unlock the benefits that OG wants to plan through our extension. Our extension is what actually our extension comes logically prior to OG's kind of like attempt to like claim their benefits in this debate or whatever, because I'm going to tell you that like people are going to be like more comforted by religion, or they're going to be like more like at peace with the fact they're queer or whatever. They need to believe that they are in a world where they will be treated fairly, rather than being doomed from the get-go. And this is what actually like maximizes people's ability and willingness to opt into religion in the first place. Oyo says a couple of other things. Firstly, this eases the anxiety of the unknown. No, because if you think you're going to go into hell from the get-go, then obviously why would you stay in that religion? You just opt out. You lose the benefits of religion that they talk about. So if you believe that that religion is good for people with economic difficulty, etc., we win on their own metric, because of a religion that is much more charitable probably attracts and consoles more people to maximize the benefits that OO wants to claim. Well, which is why I'm so proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip, and I welcome the Opposition Whip to close up the debate. Hear, hear.
Best speech that I've seen for years.
Hi, sorry, give me a few moments to set up. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I begin with my clash, I'd first like to raise one matter of housekeeping. CG has conceded in their whip speech that God will have done everything you can to get into heaven. This contradicts the by their member about how it's going to be very strict. That there are like 5 strict rules that you have to abide by to get into heaven. We don't think that this contradiction actually means that their general case stand, because they're saying on one hand that it's really hard to get into heaven, so that's why we should have purgatory as an alternative. But on the other hand, they're also saying that it's also really easy to get into heaven because God is sympathetic. So we just don't think that this contradiction is necessarily one that's beneficial for them, right? Now, moving on to my clash on who better benefits society as a whole. Purgatory as a dominant religious norm means that this is going to be brought to light for the majority of individuals. The majority of individuals are going to learn about the existence of purgatory. Even non-religious people are going to be exposed to purgatory, similar to how heaven and hell are depicted in popular media, meaning that most normal average people know about heaven and hell, right? And so we think that by proving the clash on who better benefits society, we actually win by CG's own metric, because these benefits are also transferable onto individuals who are not religious, right? So we think that, first of all, we want to clarify that one morally wrong action does not immediately send you to the pits of hell. Religions have systems of repentance for believers, and heaven and hell is usually measured by net worth. We agree with O on this. This means that the majority of individuals will be able to get into heaven on our side of the house. The majority of individuals on our side of the house are going to see heaven as an achievable goal, where heaven and hell are the main systems of afterlife, right? But how we actually split from OO is that opening half is really fixated on minorities. Minorities of Gulf aren't going to opt into a religion if their best case scenario is purgatory, which is a neutral ground, which isn't that good anyway. It's not something that they're actually going to aim for and spend their lives working towards. They're not going to opt into religion anyways, so that wipes the benefits their side can claim, right? At least on our side, these minorities actually have some hope of getting into heaven because of alternative belief systems in religion. Sorry. Also, religion is changing with the times. We see that priests in some parts of the UK have begun to celebrate gay marriage in churches. We think that there's actually going to be some sort of changes established in these religions that are able to accommodate these minorities. So we don't think that their side can really claim that they comfort minorities by giving them the paltry sort of second choice alternative of purgatory instead of heaven, right? So we think that we actually better serve to comfort these minorities, to give them sort of community by actually telling them that, hey, if you do like net good, if you try your best to like sort of not sin, right, and like to do these morally good actions, we think that our side is actually going to be able to give these minorities that sort of comfort, right? So opening half is out of this debate since they spend half their time talking about minorities. So let me quickly deal with some other claims that opening has made, right? We think that our side actually outweighs opening because sorry, we think the outside actually outweighs opening because there is going to be an actual sort of system of morality that is more sort of codified instead of being something that is really just like sort of more vague and more difficult to define, right? So we think that having this sort of a stricter moral code means that people are held to a higher moral standard and that they're actually going to commit more morally justifiable actions instead of doing things that are morally great. They're held to a higher standard. This is what Ava has already forwarded to you in her member speech, and we don't think that this actually means anything open half can stand, right? But before I continue, I'll take the point.
Do you think heaven is more accessible on the government side?
We think that heaven is not more accessible on the government side, right? We think that it's on our side precisely that heaven becomes more accessible because on our side, there's no like alternative to heaven other than hell. And I don't think most people would be working towards hell. It's on our side where people know that the only like sort of vaguely like the only alternative they should even vaguely aspire toward is heaven. They are actually going to be the ones who make the best decisions, who try to keep themselves to as strict of a moral standard as possible. Your side is the one that's actually offering them the sort of low-hanging fruit that's actually rotten on the inside, that's i.e. purgatory, right? And we don't think that this is actually going to be good in the long term because people are just going to aspire towards this, not aspire toward, but like people are going to see purgatory and think, oh, that's an okay alternative. I guess I'll just do that because it doesn't require as much from me as going to heaven would, right? And so the majority of people who actually do this are actually going to not be as moral in their actions. They're not going to hold themselves to as high of a standard, right? And so we think that what makes people want to work toward heaven and thus do moral deeds is both the fear of hell as well as wanting to go to a better place in the afterlife. To the average individual, purgatory seems to fulfill both of these requirements, and it's a low-hanging fruit that most people will reach for because they think that heaven is something that's really hard to get to. They think that they need to be really good to get to heaven, whereas to get into purgatory, they don't need to hold themselves to as high of a moral standard. Recognize that heaven being something that is still like an that still exists on your side of the house doesn't mean that people are still going to necessarily, or like doesn't mean that the majority of people are still necessarily going to aspire towards it, because they see that they have the option to still sort of commit these morally grey acts and still land themselves in a place that is not entirely like, burning lumps of coal. So we think that that's actually the key differentiator, right? So CJ has said that people are going to try and maximize their chance to go to heaven anyways, but we think that that's going to happen even more so on our side when it's literally the only alternative, right? When on our side, people are going to try all they can to go to heaven out of fear of hell, out of fear of spending their afterlife in some place terrible, right? So we think that it's on our side where people are actually going to be morally better. And this is what Ava has already told you, right? People who have committed morally bad actions actually try to fully repent. They're going to maybe try to make compensation to their victims or change their ways to sort of qualify for heaven. Individuals who are currently morally grey are going to try and improve themselves and sort of hold themselves to a higher moral standard. And we think that the individuals who are already morally good are going to stay that way on both sides of the house. So we think that ultimately we take this debate because our side is the one that actually benefits the entirety of society. So proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Opposition Whip, and thank you everyone for what was a superb semi-final. Please cross floors, shake hands, and yeah, panel, let's move to deliberation room 1. The rest of you go hang out in the GA hall. We'll be with you with a call shortly.
Thank you for the debate.
Thanks for the debate.